Neck-throughs, guitars, they're like a guy that won't have a beer with you.
I want to hear what's pushing the notes.
Freddie King and B.B. King, Albert King, and let's not forget Burger King.
I don't want to blow my knuckle out.
Stainless steel is the work of the devil.
These go to 11.
From the East Amplification Tone Labs in Baltimore, Maryland, it's the Amps and Axes Show with your hosts, Jeff the Godfather of Low Wattage Amps Bober and Mick Marcelino.
Well, good day to you, Mr. Bober.
Good day to you, Mr. Marcelino.
Hey, man.
Hey, man.
We got to thank our fans.
Thank you, fans.
Yes.
Thanks for fanning.
The numbers are looking great, which we love.
Always.
And you guys are clicking through the Amazon banner on ampsandaxescast.com. And you guys are contacting us out there, too, on our little contact page.
Absolutely.
And getting some cool email back and feedback and, all that good stuff.
Yeah, we're getting a whole lot of stuff, man.
Yeah.
So it's very good. Thank you very much for participating in the show.
Yes, and checking out our good buddy from the north.
Mr. Jason Sadidas.
With the quick lick.
Quick lick.
Yeah,
that's right.
And he's tearing them up, man.
Yes, he is.
He's been doing some great stuff for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you got to love that.
I absolutely do.
Okay, so it's going to be a short intro, but I just got to read this thing that I read today. This is from the Alternative Nation webpage.
Okay.
Okay, now, the title of this thing is David Lee Roth delivers racist rant during Van Halen show in Holmdel, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
They played last
night.
That's
the Art Center.
Yeah.
Garden State Art Center.
So they played
or whatever
last
they call
night.
it now. Whoever's sponsoring it now.
Exactly. Yes. PNC Bank.
Oh, there you go.
That's who it is. Now, this guy...
I think that's the Art Center.
I don't know if I want to say his name or not, but I really want to tear this guy a new one. So maybe I should say his name.
You mean the
guy who wrote this?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
His name is Mike Mazzarone. And boy, his credentials are so worth this article. He graduated from broadcasting school in 2011, but before that, he was part of a wrestling radio show from 2006 to 2009. So this guy's done like 1,020 posts on this page about different artists and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So here's how he starts it off, and this
sounds like it's going to be a little opinionated.
It's a little bit. So first he starts it off with he was glad that he missed this opening act, but got to see 4 songs from Wayne Kenny Shepherd.
Oh my God.
And
are you serious?
He said, it's this blues rocker warm-up act. And he was not too happy that they were doing a Fleetwood Mac's "Oh and Jimi Hendrix classic modern anthem Voodoo Child. He thinks he tore him up. That he should have been wearing. It would have worked if he would have been wearing a classic Hollywood Hulk Hogan NWO shirt.
Jesus.
Right. So this.
And by tore him up, you mean did a crappy job.
He said that it was the most horrible rendition of Voodoo Child he's ever heard. I've seen this guy do. I've seen Kenny Wayne
yeah,
do Voodoo
and not
Child.
Wayne Kenny.
And he does an excellent job of that song.
Yes.
And he pays it some homage because he uses the Voodoo Strat. He uses the Strat that Fender sold from the Monterey Pop Festival reissue thing, right? Which was a very expensive Strat, but Kenny Wayne takes it out because he's like, hey, you got to play them, right?
They get better.
He just said that that's one song that you're not supposed to do.
Oh, really?
Yeah, is Voodoo Child by Hendrix.
Tell Stevie Ray he was never supposed to do that either.
Yeah. The result was a barely listenable cover that turned into a hot mess of a jam session. Yeah. This kid has no idea. Then he starts to go on and he tells us
what is this kid's favorite band? One Direction?
I have no idea. But then he starts to go in here, and what I love, this is the part that I love. oh, the concert was great. Dave could have never been on better. Then he actually mentioned something that happened like in the 70s when he said you couldn't, back in the day when they used to be able to do black and Latin gang signs as you were riding in the lowriders. This is something that Roth said, right? Mm-hmm. Now, Roth is from, I think, Iowa originally. And his father was a doctor. And he's Jewish, Dave is. Mm-hmm. And he was in those really rough parts of L.A. during the times that his dad was trying to become... he was not rich, Roth wasn't.
Right.
His mom supported the family while his dad went to college to get his degree to become a doctor. Mm-hmm. So they lived dirt poor. So when he got to L.A., they were not living in posh area. They were pretty poverty, and he was in the East L.A. areas. He grew up with all the Latins and the black areas and all.
Right.
And so Dave has had those first years of Dave's life. But see, this guy has no clue.
But he lived it.
Yeah,
he lived
through that.
Right.
He was making a comment, and then this kid goes on like, "Oh, I had to check with my editor, and I checked with my girlfriend, and she confirmed that he's." And he was like blowing this thing up out, and then he's like, "But all in all, a great show."
This guy is overly politically correct and musically starved.
Oh.
That's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I was looking for an address because I was going to tell everybody to flame this guy to no end. But just
oh my God, that's
pathetic.
Wow, yeah.
And this guy wrote 1,020 posts. He has all kinds of stuff.
Go back to writing about wrestling.
Yeah,
you need to go back from whence you came.
Oh, and the kicker was he wanted to know why they didn't do two Pound Cake and Right Now, 2 Sammy Hagar songs. Mm-hmm. You're never going to see. Shocker, you're never going to see David Lee Roth sing a Sammy Hagar Van Halen song. Mm-hmm. This kid was expecting
probably
that.
Because he can't.
Yeah, that is true. But why would he?
Nowadays.
Why would he? Right?
Right.
I mean, he had the Van Halen albums that made that band from
Absolutely.
1 to 84. And this kid goes, I was really expecting that because the one song Right Now really hit home with me. Because of the New Jersey Devils NHL team. It was
God.
Absolute.
Stop.
Yeah.
Stop.
And believe
That's
me,
crazy.
When I read it, I was like, you got, first off, just the disrespect for Kenny Wayne Shepherd.
Yeah.
Is ridiculous.
Or Wayne Kenny.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wayne Kenny. Yeah. Dude.
Yeah. Get a clue.
Get a clue. Thank you. Get a clue.
Go. Speaking of clues.
And speaking of Jersey.
Yeah.
Our guest was born in Jersey. This week's guest.
Yes.
A citizen of the great state of New Jersey. Now resides in New York, I believe. But, he's one of my favorite guitar players, man. He really is. And, I mean, he's got his own trio that he tours with a lot, but he also plays with one of my all-time favorite bands for many years now. And I'm really excited to interview this guy. So without further ado, we'll be back with our guest of the week, guitarist for Steely Dan, Mr. Jon Herington.
This is Scott Sherrard here from the Greg Allman Band, and you're listening to Amps and Axes.
All right, and we are back, and as promised, our guest of the week, the one, the only, Mr. Jon Herington. Jon, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate you being on the show with us today. So, and I'm excited. I started the show saying how excited I was to have you on because you're absolutely one of my favorite players, man. I love your style. I love what you do.
Thank you.
And we're going to find out where it all came from. I've been listening to Time on My Hands for like the past week now.
Oh, good.
Since we got it in the mail, and it's what a fantastic album. It's so diverse.
Yeah, it's very different.
Yeah, there's every song is really cool in its own different way.
Yeah.
And I love your voice too.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, I think the whole thing is really good. But I love your playing style. Always have, and I've always been a huge Steely Dan fan from the first album on. So we're gonna talk about that, but we're gonna talk about Mr. Jon Herington first and find out what sparked you into the world of music. So Tell us a little about yourself, where you came from, and what your first musical experiences were, and why you wound up where you are now.
Okay. Well, I was born in Paterson, New Jersey, but raised around the Jersey Shore in a town called West Long Branch.
Oh, okay.
I had musical grandparents more than musical parents, but parents who were interested in music enough so that my brother and I both got piano lessons, and we had to play a woodwind instrument, so I played saxophone as a kid and piano until about the 8th grade, when I heard basically British invasion pop rock.
Mm-hmm.
I had been a serious radio listener, to AM radio when I was a little kid, and I loved Motown, and I loved the Beach Boys and the Four Seasons, and of course the Beatles were a huge, thing for me. In 1964 on the Ed Sullivan Show, and of course on the radio. But when I really got the guitar bug, it was around 1968 or something, and it was FM radio, and in the time of Cream and Hendrix and the Beatles and the Stones and the Who and Zeppelin, and I just fell in love with all that music. And I think I really fell in love with the sound of an amplifier as well as the sound of a guitar. It was I remember the first day I heard Wes Montgomery. It was also the first day I heard Led Zeppelin. A good friend of mine was a neighbor, and his older brother had just come home from the record store, and he had a Wes Montgomery record, and he had the first Led Zeppelin record, and it was really, I just, at the time, I have since come to be a huge fan of Wes Montgomery, but at the time, I just didn't want to hear it at all. And Zeppelin was just so fresh and incredible and beautiful.
Oh yeah, massive energy behind it, and so new.
The sound of I think I was drawn to the sound of a guitar through a cranked up amp. The sound was so vocal and much more like a saxophone, which I had grown up playing, but also like a violin or a cello or something. And that just really kind of floored me. I mean, the recordings were also done so well at the time, so I think tape was contributing to the sound of that I fell in love with. But in short, basically, that's when I really sort of feel like I got formed in terms of my taste for guitar tone and style, even songwriting style. Because I think you can probably still even hear in Time on My Hands, you still hear a lot of those early influences.
Oh, there's so many influences in there. All the way up to like Al Green. I'm trying to remember the track that's.
I Ain't Got You is a little like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The organ thing.
Yes. Yeah. Do you remember who got you your first guitar and what it was? And
yeah, I do. It was my parents bought me a guitar. Well, actually, there was a guitar in the house. My brother had an acoustic guitar. It was a Silvertone acoustic, and it was with that heavy strings and action that were never changed, and action that was literally about 3/4 of an inch off the finger. I wasn't won over by that, I can tell you that. But the first guitar that my parents would buy for me was a cheapie, and it was a domino shaped like one of those Vox guitars, that strange sort of geometrical shape, it was like 5-sided thing.
Oh yeah. They did those. They did the teardrops.
Yeah, it was something like it's like a teardrop shape, but it was with angles,
Mm-hmm.
And it was horrible. It was really horrible. And I remember I did finally buy a good amp, which was a Fender Concert, and I was using that and the guitar, but it was still using that horrible guitar, and as a result, because it had no tone, I remember I borrowed like an old bass amp from the bass player I was working with, just to sort of kind of fill out the sound, And then finally, when I just couldn't stand it anymore, I saved up enough money to buy a Les Paul, and it was a deluxe gold top Les Paul, and I think I bought it in probably 1970, maybe.
Wow, deluxe gold top.
Did they have the mini humbuckers?
It had mini humbuckers, yeah.
That was the first guitar
It was a great guitar.
Yeah, that I caught my eye at a music store.
I plugged it into the same rig I'd been using with this extra bass amp, and I couldn't figure out what it sounded completely weird and like wrong, you know. I said, "What's up with that?" And so finally, I just unplugged the stupid bass amp and just plugged right into the concert, and it was a beautiful match, you know.
You're trying to compensate for something that it didn't need compensating for.
Like, you know, the first guitar just didn't have anything happening, and the Les Paul, of course, was a great guitar.
Now, you said you bought a concert. When? What years? What year was it around that you bought the amp?
It was the amp. It was one of those brown face with the sort of yellowish grill cloth.
So you had the original 410 concert.
Yes, yeah, really old one. My first amp, actually, I wanted a deluxe reverb because I'd heard them and played through them and loved them, and my father refused to buy me one because I think he thought that number one, they were expensive, but and they probably were cheap back then, you know. But it felt expensive to him, and I think he always felt as a parent he had like a duty to teach me something. So instead of the deluxe reverb, my first amp was a Heath kit.
Oh, nice.
That we had to build in the basement.
Mm-hmm. solid state head and
solder it, and it was unbelievable.
Yeah, was that a 410 cabinet or a 412 or a 212? I don't remember.
Just a 212 one.
212.
And you know, it probably wasn't all that bad an amp really, but you know, it was horrible to have to do all that work and still end up with, you know, not the amp that I wanted, but something else. You know, I mean, I really just wanted a deluxe reverb.
Yeah, they are not a deluxe reverb, that's for sure.
I mean, finally, like the concert replaced that one, and I used that for many years. Actually, it was a great amp.
Yeah, and they have great. Technically it's tremolo, but it's the only Fender amp that has anything that actually leans towards vibrato. They got such a great sounding one in that amp.
Yeah, I can't forget that. I don't think I used that much, but yeah, it had real tone. I know that, and it sounded great through it.
I actually still have one of those.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do.
I don't have either that amp or the guitar. I'd like to have both. But,
oh wow! But do you have the Heath kit?
I have not been a collector of stuff for some reason. It's you know, I like to travel light pretty much, and although, you know, people would argue that still I probably have almost 30 guitars now, and I've been stripping down for a couple of years now, but that still sounds like a lot to some people. But
to some, yeah.
Traveling with Walter Becker here on this Steely tour, and believe me, you don't know what a lot of guitars are until you see how many. Always buying more too.
So I hear.
It's like Billy Gibbons.
Mm-hmm.
They say Billy Gibbons goes out. They take like an empty case, and then they come back and they still have guitars laying around.
Yeah,
because he'll buy like 24 guitars when he's out on tour.
Well, you know, I guess if you can, why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, who is it that's liquidating? Rick Nielsen's liquidating a lot of stuff right now through Reverb.
I know Tom Petty has a mess of guitars. I know Todd. Not Todd. I mean. Jackson Brown has a bunch of guitars too. So he's a big,
Cool. So what was the first band like, and were you doing the whole Zeppelin thing at that point, or had you moved on before you started the band?
I guess the first I tried to start a band when I didn't even play guitar, like when I was a little kid, and I think we were called the Sound Waves or something like that, and. You know, I played saxophone, so it was a little weird, but there were a couple of guitar players, and the cool thing was that we used to rehearse in my basement because my mother was the only one who would let the kids make some noise, you know. And so, but the guitar players in the band never practiced, so they left all the gear at my house in the basement. So that was like a field day for me. I went downstairs, and like within a couple of months, I was playing better than those guys because I was playing every day. You know, so that's kind of how I learned, actually. But the first real band that actually got out and performed, where we did some cover music and also some originals, was a band called Highway, and it was sort of my high school band for many years. And you know, we did like proms at the school, and we would do some local high schools. And the best things we ever did were were some bar gigs in Asbury Park where there was sort of a scene. And,
I was going to say this. You're in South Jersey with this band at this point, right? Yeah.
And a couple nights, and there were a couple of gigs where we opened for Bruce Springsteen and a couple of local gigs because he was from Freehold and he worked around that area all the time. He used to play our high school dances.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a couple gigs opening for him, probably in the very early 70s, somewhere around 71 or 70, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, I had read that. So
it's like his beginnings, right?
Yeah,
it was before his first Columbia record deal, I think, and he was doing mostly solo work. I think when we opened for him, he was just doing that, and it was disappointing to us because we loved the bands that he had put together because there were several that we heard all the time and just loved, and but his writing had taken a turn towards the much more sort of like Dylan-inspired kind of busier lyrics, and really was much more about the lyrics than it ever had been. And so he was playing acoustic guitar and doing a lot of gigs just like that to sort of, get that side of his playing developed. I think he was performing developed. But but that so that's what we did, and I was writing tunes for the band, some of which were pretty lousy, and once in a while one or two that were pretty good, but. It was sort of a pretty sheltered world down there, but we had fun.
Yeah, that's I don't know if I told you the story, Mick, but I'm also from Jersey, from North Jersey, and the high school band we had, we were auditioning another guitar player, and somebody came up from the Freehold area that supposedly played with Bruce back in the day. I don't know, it just didn't work. We didn't hire him, but I believe the rig was a Les Paul and a 410 acoustic amp, a solid state acoustic amp, but he had a really good sound. Yeah, even though it was one of those solid state things. It was better than a Heathkit. I know that.
Yeah.
But,
I actually played one of those acoustic amps for a while. I'm not sure why I bought it, but it was sort of the beginning of the solid state era, and I didn't. I mean, I played through it for quite a while, but I didn't really like it. I mean, I don't. Looking back on it, I don't think I was getting a great sound. And my favorite sound when I was a kid was with a borrowed 50-watt Marshall head and a borrowed Guild 212 Thunder bass cabinet. That was a great sound with a Les Paul. That was a great sound.
Yeah, I remember the.
It was quiet. You could crank it up. I'm about relatively quiet. I mean, it was loud, I guess, but it's probably like an inefficient match of amp and cabinet, but so it broke up really early, and
nice.
I love that.
I mean, that's the ultimate, man. A 50-watt Marshall that's breaking up beautifully.
I remember the first time I remember the first time that I came in your shop when it was Precision Audio Tailoring, and you had just started making the Twin Master.
Oh, the Buddha.
Yeah, and you were like, hey, it's 18 watts, but if you need it really loud, and you had this acoustic amplifier, and you plugged it in, you slaved it out and plugged it into this thing, and it was literally shaking the front door off of this place. I was like, my God, this is the loudest thing I've ever heard. And you go, yeah, you just slave it into
That's
something.
Why I put the slave out in there, in case you need to remove walls. That you just plug it into something big. That is so funny because you had, John, you had the acoustic 410 and you had the Les Paul. It's like... This can't be the same guy that auditioned for us back in the day, but it's so crazy that you had the same kind of rig for a little while.
It was a 410. I forget what it was. It was a head and cabinet, but I don't know what it was. I can't remember anymore.
Yeah, this was a combo. It wasn't a head. But
there's stuff. By that time, it was kind of, we were really into the Allman Brothers, so we were doing all those tunes like In Memory of Elizabeth Reed and all that stuff.
It's exactly what we were doing. Yeah. So obviously everybody was doing it.
I guess so.
That'd be really crazy if.
Yeah. I think it's Les Paul acoustic amp.
No, and it wasn't Freehold either. I mean, I'm trying to think of who that was, but I can't remember. But definitely wasn't me.
I don't know. The timing's about right,
Yeah, the timing was right, actually.
Yeah.
But that's pretty wild.
That is, it is pretty wild. So where did it go from there? How did you jump into the next level of the whole music thing? I mean, high school bands were one thing. Some people after that, go into real estate and sell houses. What you took the next jump musically? What happened?
I'll tell you what happened. I mean, it was basically I got a serious sort of dose of reality, and I had a serious fear response that really motivated me. I went to college, basically. So far, I just went to New Brunswick, New Jersey, and went to Rutgers. And I just found out how big a world it was, because even the first day I got there, I met musicians who had been seriously disciplined practicers when they were kids, and I never had been. I mean, I never was a good piano student because I didn't practice. I didn't practice the saxophone. I was interested in, I played the saxophone, when we played Brown Sugar, I could kind of imitate the sax solo in the middle, and, I picked up stuff by ear, and I basically learned to get through some simple stuff on all the instruments I was playing, which were piano, saxophone, and guitar, mostly guitar. But even on guitar, I mean, I was motivated more by just sort of figuring out music that hit my ear and, that intrigued me. Like if it sounded interesting to me or good to me, I'd have to figure it out. It was like this obsession to sort of find out what the notes were. But once I figured out, once I cracked the code, I didn't care about getting it together so I could play it just like the record. I just didn't care about the performance aspect of it as much. I just was motivated by, oh, what's that sound? How do they do that? I just needed to know how it worked. How they do that, whether it was piano or saxophone or guitar. But so I just sat by the record player all day and dropped the needle, and that's how I learned how to hear and listen well, and it's how I learned to play the guitar. But I never had any instruction on the guitar, at least when I was first learning. And I had enough of an ear, so I could get through most of that music that I was interested in the high school days. And I think I sounded pretty convincing as a basic blues rocker. But when I got to college, right away, I was so embarrassed that I had no chops, no technique at all, and I hadn't really studied, and so, it kind of scared me, and I said, oh, I got to get serious about this, and so the first thing I decided was I had to choose one instrument instead of playing three poorly. I had to play one well, and I really was already more advanced on the guitar, and I was more interested in the guitar because. Unlike the saxophone, you could sing while you played the guitar, and I thought that was a plus. Pianos
never thought of it that way, but yeah.
And pianos were big and heavy, and you couldn't carry them around. I couldn't have one in my dorm room, except for a Fender Rhodes, but even that, you can't carry that around so easy.
Right.
So guitar made some sense that way, and it was really what I was most interested in, and it was so central to the music that I was, in love with there too. So it was an easy choice to go with the guitar, but I wasn't interested in classical guitar to learn the guitar, because I never loved that repertoire, and I was never drawn to the sound. I always was drawn to the sound of electric guitar. But I had already started to listen to like Stevie Wonder tunes and some of the more sophisticated harmonies that come up in those tunes were interesting to me and unfamiliar to me. They weren't like bar chords, and they weren't like cowboy chords on the guitar. They were, major sevenths and 13s and all sorts of jazz chord voicings, really. So I think I had enough of an interest in that, so that it made sense to sort of take a couple jazz courses that were offered at part of Rutgers University there, and I did. I took a couple courses with a guy named Ted Dunbar. He was sort of a Wes disciple. Very good guitar player. Played with his thumb, and I guess he made a living as a pharmacist. But he was teaching. Rutgers had a new jazz program there. He's one of the guys there that was teaching. And the best thing he ever did. It was interesting. He taught me a guitar improvisation course, and then a jazz improvisation course, and then a basic jazz guitar intro course or something like that. And I didn't know much about it at all, and I was just beginning to listen to jazz players. But I was intrigued enough so that I knew I needed some work, and I needed to get a regular practice thing going. So I asked him if he taught private lessons, because I needed to take some private lessons and get with a teacher. And the best thing he ever did for me was to say no. He didn't teach privately, and he recommended a guy named Harry Leahy, who was a Plainfield, New Jersey guitar teacher at the time, guitar player at the time. He's not alive anymore, but he became my teacher for several years in those early college days. And I went back after college. I got a National Endowment for the Arts grant and went to study with Harry again years later, after a couple of years. Wow. And he just completely blew my mind. He just opened my mind about what was possible on the guitar. It was a total revolution to me. It was.
Was it still basically jazz, or was he going in more avant-garde directions?
No, he was a jazz player, and a pretty straight-ahead jazz player. I wouldn't have called him extremely modern, but he was kind of a traditionalist. But kind of made sense for the age that he was. But and he wasn't old. But he played a serious arch top. And with heavy strings, and knew all the chords, and was an amazing sort of arranger of like chord melody, and a great improviser, and just a real amazing teacher, and because he knew so much. I mean, he could read anything. He was a real schooled musician, and his training was deep. I mean, he had studied with both Johnny Smith for many years, and also with a guy named Dennis Sandoli, who became my teacher later too. And Sandoli had taught a lot of jazz greats, including John Coltrane, for years.
Wow.
He's in Philadelphia. Yeah, I mean, Harry, he basically was the first guy to sort of make me play scales and arpeggios and everything imaginable, and study every chord inversion. And I just got so into it that, it basically was an exploration of everything that was available to play on the guitar. Mm-hmm. And the biggest problem with my time with Harry was, again, there was so much to explore that, like, it would take me, like, I could barely get through like all the material and play it once, like in a week's lesson, because there was so much stuff he was laying on me.
Right.
And as a result, I still didn't get any technique together. I just wasn't able to.
You weren't becoming proficient at it. You're just getting through it.
I think it turned out like until a couple of years later, when I decided to go to his teacher, Dennis Sandoli in Philly, still while I was in college. I didn't start to get any technique together. But when I first went to Dennis Sandoli in Philly, he wouldn't let me do his sort of musical work for about 8 months. He just made me practice technique. It was like all scales and chord inversions, but like mostly single line stuff. And he just wouldn't let me do anything but the technical stuff, because he just said I just didn't have enough chops to sort of tackle the other stuff. So, wow. So he really cracked the whip. And for the first time, I started getting my hands together, and the key was not just the number of hours per day. He swore he could tell if I'd been putting my 4 hours a day in, which I did. And it had to be just on his lesson material, or he would know. And he was cannily good at knowing whether you put it in or not. But the thing about he had a monthly lesson plan, so each week you had much less to get down, So, but what that meant was that you played it a whole lot more times, So it was much less material each week, and it was more manageable. Mm-hmm. And as a result, you played it more and more, and that's how you develop chops. I think it's got to be serious repetition over and over again with the same muscles doing the same thing again and again.
I like that.
I agree. Yeah,
most guitar teachers, it's like, okay, here's the parts. Come back next week.
Right. No, you can play them. Okay, let's move on to the next.
Yeah. But you can totally see like you didn't rehearse that enough.
No, he really was after really upping the performance level, because like I said, I was always much more interested in the sort of brain interests. That's what intrigued me, and that's what was so great about Harry, because he knew so much about the guitar. I remember like filling out pages and pages of different kind combinations of chords to try to discover like how to play every single possible chord on the thing, and so but I couldn't, I just wasn't playing as much, I was just sort of learning the fingerboard and learning what was possible, and I was getting some time playing, but it wasn't focused enough to really develop my muscles. So
don't you feel that both were almost equally as important?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't trade the time with Harry for anything, because I mean it was like it really was mind opening more than anything else, more than any other experience of studying the guitar that I've ever had. And but Dennis's thing was practical, because he made me play. He said, no, you got to get your hands together. They're not that's not going to work, And so he really just he had no he wasn't just trying to be nice. He was just he was trying to be nice, but I mean, like, he was sort of a he was a disciplinarian as a teacher. He was kind of like the maestro student model. Harry was sort of like a buddy, and we used to sit for hours just sort of playing like different versions of like chord melody stuff that we arranged. Like,
it's almost like one is how much you can play, and the other one is how well you can play it.
Yeah, I mean, it was good to have both. I mean, I couldn't have done without either one. They were each valuable in their separate way. Absolutely.
Well, the combination of the two, generated the Jon Herington that we love to hear. And
well, it's interesting. Dennis's music was fascinating to work on, but I was a little young. I didn't know. I don't think I was an accomplished enough jazz player when I was working on his material. So that I think was. Again, it was mostly great for my hands, and pretty good for my ears. But I think I could have benefited from it much later had I really just gone into playing jazz and nothing but. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't really to be. I mean, I did some jazz gigs for a few years after that, and I worked on the solo guitar thing and would do gigs like that way too, and I enjoyed that. But
so at that time, you weren't out playing jazz as well as learning it, but were you out playing rock?
I was trying to do gigs. I wasn't doing. I mean, the gigs I got were subbing for my teacher, subbing for Harry sometimes on little gigs, and then I put a little band together here and there when there was an opportunity to play at a club somewhere. But then we were making like $30 a night or something,
mm-hmm.
each. So it was never looking very lucrative, and I was teaching students to make a living, and so gigging and teaching was how I was trying to make money. I was still living in New Jersey at the time. But it was starting to, I mean, it was starting to look pretty grim. I mean, I think, in terms of employment.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. It's like, well, he wasn't making a very lucrative living at it, and it wasn't looking very good, but you still stuck with it. You didn't turn into a dentist or something.
Well, I mean, I was really into the music. I mean, I really loved that, but when I looked at Harry was kind of an idol for me at the time, and when I looked at his life, it was a rough one, and so I was starting to scratch my chin and say, I don't know about this, because he would teach about 80 guitar students a week,
Oh, wow.
Crazy. And he would do these little gigs for $30 a night, in these little local places in North Jersey and sometimes down the shore. And, he'd be making $35 a night or something, playing his ass off, and people are talking and eating. It's like, no, this is a little weird, And then he got a gig with Phil Woods for a while. And that was probably the most mainstream gig he ever had. And he did it for a little while, but he always sounded better in the trio to me when he played with his own thing. So it just, I don't know. I was kind of just asking the question, like, is this for me or not? And when a couple like life events kind of just sort of happened and basically transported me in a really kind of strange way to Indianapolis, Indiana, and I moved out there for about 3 or 4 years. I was out there. It was basically a girl that I had met who had moved back to Indianapolis, and I followed her. And I think I was also trying to escape a family situation, which was my parents had divorced, and I was the only kid living close to my mom, and so she needed taken care of. But I I had done more than my share, and I think I was itching to escape that role, So I took the invitation to go out to Indianapolis, thinking I wouldn't even be playing the guitar and make a living. I was thinking I'd look in the want ads, on Sunday and see if I could get a writing job or something. I had been an English major at Rutgers.
Wow.
The reason I was an English major was because it seemed like the easiest way, the path of least resistance to get through school, which would also free me up to do as much music that I want, like take the music courses that I wanted. I did a lot of that. I really was more like a music major in terms of, if you look at my course load, but I wasn't registered as a music major, so I didn't. My major was in English.
Right.
Yeah, I got a little story. Because when you were saying that, you had to take this look, and when you saw that this guy had 80 students and he'd get these small gigs and stuff.
Right.
There was a guy in town here, and I won't mention his name. I'll tell Jeff afterwards because we both know him. He's no longer here, but this guy was he was the hot guitar player of the city. I mean, literally, he was in a band that was gigging probably 6 nights a week. He had students. Right. It was the whole thing, right? And I remember...
Initials RZ?
Yes. And I remember I got to open up for his band one night, right? So we did our gig. We finished our deal. I packed all my stuff in. And then we sat there and watched him. At the end of the night, I was going outside, and he was putting his stuff into what was probably equivalent to a 15-year-old Chevy Chevette. And I'm going, oh my God. We're not in a bad part of town. I'm not thinking this is the beater car that he takes just to the gigs. And I was like,
where's the Beamer?
I was like, my God, this guy's a working musician. He's not making obviously anything, you know, and it was this really weird setback kind of I was like, whoa, man, and but I had a career. I mean, I was doing the double thing. I was network engineer and the other things.
As we all were.
Yeah. But man, that was eye-opening.
Eye-opening. Yeah, I'm sure. Wow.
Yeah, it was for me too. And I had really, I think that one of the interesting things about jazz, it seems to me, is that people who are learning it, and once they get into it and they decide they really want to do it, there's a way you sort of, it seems that you have to immerse yourself in it. I mean, it really seems, like to really even get in the game where you can do any kind of coherent improvising, and sound like, yes, this language, it takes years. And so it's pretty common, I think, for almost everybody who does that to sort of do it, with kind of blinders on, with a really single-minded focus, and it seems necessary. And so that's what happened to me. I mean, I sold my gold top and my PA system, and I bought a Johnny Smith, F-hole, archtop guitar, and then that was the, I didn't bend a string for about 10 years. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it's almost close to the truth, and it was really, really radical for me, and it was different. So when I came out at the other end, and I was done with school, and I wasn't thinking about, studying with teachers so much anymore. I was thinking, okay, I got to start working. I taught, of course, and that was okay. But the gigging thing just was it wasn't really looking right. There was something wrong with that picture, or something smelled funny. So when I went to Indiana, it was it was kind of a new low. I really thought okay, well, this music thing isn't working out. And miraculously, I got the first weekend I got there, I went out to hear some music, and I remember there was a big band night on Monday night, and there was like a first string of players in Indianapolis who were really seriously top-notch players. There wasn't a whole lot of depth. You'd have a handful of saxophone players, a few trumpet players, a couple trombone players, and then nothing else. There was a guitar player who was a good rock player. There was a guy who could play pretty good jazz, but they weren't versatile players at all. There was a guy who was doing some studio work out there very good guitar player in that Nashville sort of mode, you know. But really, you know, not as convincing like a rock soloist, and not a jazz player at all. And so, you know, there were actually, just to make a long story short, it turned out there was a scene there. They were very welcoming. They weren't like sort of scared of losing their jobs. Everybody just was, you know, welcoming me with open arms. And you know, I was doing jam sessions during the day pretty much all the time. Like the second week I was there, by the second week I also had a gig at this little rib joint, you know, where we were playing jazz. And you know, it was also West Montgomery's town, Indianapolis, and you know, his brother Buddy was still alive and working there. A lot of players who had played with Wes and loved Wes were still alive and still gigging. So there was sort of a jazz scene out there, and one that I sort of fell right into because I loved Wes, and you know, I was an okay jazz player at the time, and I had actually already done a little work with Jack McDuff on the road, and in fact I forgot about that. That was my first real road gig out of college, you know. I auditioned for Jack McDuff. I forget how I got that, but he hired me even though I was really too young for the job, and we were out for maybe it probably wasn't even a month, and we had a couple of gigs, and you know, we had a trailer on the back of the Cadillac, and we drove for 20 hours to the south side of Chicago for our first gig, you know, straight from New York to there, you know, no checking into a hotel or anything. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
And we played gigs. We played a bunch of gigs, and then he said he parked us in Indianapolis after we had a show there, and left us in a hotel like out on the perimeter of the city, like on, you know, one of those 495s or whatever it is, you know, like those big roads that are, you know, we were in some hotel. He's got the only car. He takes his car, goes up to Chicago to shack up with some school teacher he knew up there, and like he's, I'm gonna get some more gigs for us. You know, like, I'll let you guys know as soon as I have something. You know? Like, so he's going up. He needs us. All we got is a vending machine with the, you know, like, we're stuck, you know. So
was his name John Belushi?
Like that. So finally, that was a great. I mean, it was a great privilege to play in that chair, but it was absolutely horrible conditions. But Jack McDuff's band was famous for having had, you know, amazing guitar players, including George Benson.
Wow. So
yeah, it was sort of it's kind of even a resume item for a budding jazz guitar player.
Yeah, what a way to cut your teeth. Wow.
But it was a mess, and so I basically, like, I just decided I got to go home. You know, this is not going to work. And luckily, I had met a waitress at the Indianapolis gig, and I was able to sort of stay with her until I could get a train and go back home. You know, because I actually had a gig booked or something I didn't want to miss. But you know, so this was crazy. But so Indianapolis was only a little familiar at the time I moved. But when I did move, you know, like I said, it was a huge shift, and all of a sudden, this was an opportunity for me to not only like gig in the jazz world, because they were welcoming that way.
Well, I would think so, with all the training you had behind you. You probably came in as like the hot gun.
Well, I wasn't quite that good, but I was into it, and they could tell I was seriously into it, and also it turned out there was a studio scene out there. It was what they call a scab jingle scene, you know, like a local jingle market, which was non-union, but the work paid pretty well, and there were also a couple of recording studios that specialized in what we call GZAC, Music for Jesus. It was
well, there you go.
It was, you know, there were like lots of people doing like a sort of Sunday school circuit, you know, little like family bands and things like that, and like little, you know, people who wanted to be Christian recording artists, and they'd come to these studios, and for a pretty good deal, they'd get they get a great rhythm section, they'd get string sections sometimes, you know. So, you know, this was a chance for me, you know, since I had played in bands as a kid playing saxophone. I was comfortable with conductor. I was beginning to learn, to relearn my how to bend strings, and I was kind of like embracing my early roots again, buying guitars, and so over the course of a couple of years in Indianapolis, I mean, I was able to reinvent myself completely as a musician and a working musician. I was still doing jazz gigs and but also able to work doing lots of studio recording, so I got serious studio experience there. When if I had tried to go to New York at that age, that green, I think I probably would have fallen on my face and then not got called back. But in Indianapolis, they were much more. They were less in a hurry. It was a much more relaxed vibe, and it turned out they could use somebody who had my range of skills, and so it was just I was just kind of floored at how ultimately how lucky it was for me, because I had 3 or 4 great years out there, and
that's so funny, because I mean you went out there literally willing to not play guitar anymore.
Yeah, I mean I had basically ready to sort of give up in terms of making a living doing it.
Yeah, which
is pretty wild. So I mean, it couldn't have been, I mean, it's weird. I would never say to a student, like, oh yeah, just pick a random town and move to it. See what but that's what was great for me. It was a huge break, and it's so ironic to think that something like that could have happened. But
it was meant to happen.
And it couldn't have been better. So
yeah, wow.
Yeah, it was wild.
So you did you move back to like the New Jersey, New York area from there, or did you go somewhere else first?
I moved directly to New York after a few changes of partner. I came home married to a woman, and we moved into Manhattan in 1984. So and that was a huge shift too. I mean, another shocker. I had hoped to work and do good work in Manhattan, but it probably was a good 6 or 7 years before I even began to get anything decent at all. I made a living doing a little teaching, doing pickup gigs with original music bands for very low money on Bleecker Street in New York, and also mostly putting a tuxedo on and driving out to Long Island to do
the wedding gigs.
So that's what got me through. And a friend of mine and I were trying to get writing work. We're trying to do anything. I was just trying to kind of paying work. And we used to write mock jingles and record them on this little 4-track cassette recorder we had. Remember those Tascams and
the Fostex and the TX, the Tascams.
And so we would I would find a print ad with a good logo, a good something that we could set to music, and then I'd make a mock jingle up, and we would record it in our limited way with our little drum machine or whatever, and we sent tapes out to every jingle house in New York City, and it led to a little bit of work like that, but not much. It was a struggle for many years. It took a long time there, but it seems like for me, it turned out that perseverance, in a place where there is opportunity, and New York certainly is one of those places, it just took a long time. That's all. And I think it took people a long time to sort of figure out what I was about, because I did have I've always had a kind of wide range of interests musically. I mean, I started out as a blues rocker, really, but I got into all sorts of that those cool Joni Mitchell tunings and Crosby, Stills and Nash stuff. I used to love that. And James Taylor folk guitar. I mean, that's so beautiful. And so I had to figure all that out too. And I actually did take some classical guitar lessons for a couple of years to try to get that together a little bit. And so, I was kind of grooming myself in some general way to be, a studio kind of, well-rounded sort of studio player. And because of the jazz experience, I wasn't intimidated by any other kind of music, because I got into it deeply enough to feel like I could sort of make sense of pretty much any kind of music. And I'd studied a lot in college, to classical world too. So
right. And you could improvise, which always helps.
Right. And So I think my training had been good enough and wide enough so that I was able to say yes to different gigs, but some people would use me for playing acoustic guitar on some studios, and they didn't even know I played electric guitar. It was kind of weird. And then other people thought of me as a jazz player, and then other people thought of me as a sort of a general studio guy or something. So it was funny, and I think it took a long time before I found people that sort of would call me because they knew what I could do and could trust it, and so they felt comfortable with it. But I think New York's huge. There's so many musicians.
Oh yeah,
and there's still so many that I've never met. They're like there are whole scenes that just don't intersect sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at some point everything intersects if it's around long enough and if you're around long enough. But yeah, there's just so much going on, and it's so large. I mean, and for it to take a while after you move back there, I mean, that is not an inexpensive place to live.
No, it's true.
I mean, was your wife working?
Yeah, she was working. She actually had much better luck than I did. She was a great violinist and
oh wow,
well trained and well skilled, and so she got lots of recording work. She met a few people that sort of really quickly just sort of introduced her to the scene, and so she did well, which was was a help, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't last long. We were done in a year, but
oh wow,
but she had better luck like right away, which was that probably did soften the blow a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But and it's not like I wasn't working. It just wasn't work that I wanted to do. It was sort of work I didn't really want to do.
Now, obviously, at some point you began
to make them. So it was important. So
obviously, at some point you began recording. Because that's kind of, if I'm correct, it's kind of what landed you where you are now. So when did that happen? And was it like a trio or something that you had together that you decided to write and record with, or how did the next step come about?
I'll tell you what happened. I mean, basically, another amazing stroke of luck that the Indiana move, brought me was to get acquainted with a bunch of musicians who were at Indiana University in Bloomington. My good friend Jim Beard was there at the time, and so was Chris Bodie. So was Bob Hurst, bass player. He was the first bass player on the Tonight Show band when Branford Marsalis took it over. And a bunch of other players. Kenny Aronoff was out there. He wasn't at school there, but he was living in Bloomington because that's where John Mellencamp was based. And we had a great band that had Kenny on drums, Bob on bass, Chris Bodie was in it playing trumpet, Jim Beard was playing keys, and I was playing guitar. I mean, it was a fabulous band, and playing kind of funk. And we had three singers fronting it, and so we were just the rhythm section. It was so much fun. It was great. And but Jim followed after I got to New York. Jim followed about a year later, and he arrived with he started getting really great calls. And in fact, we both were working for the saxophonist Bill Evans. Sometime like pretty soon after he got there, which was probably 86, 87, something like that. And so. That was a fun gig in a different scene. It was more like a fusion world,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't record with Bill. Well, we did some recording, but nothing that ever was released, I don't think. But we began to do some touring with him, and Jim began to get all sorts of great work in that sort of scene where he worked with. The list is incredible. Really, if you think of Wayne Shorter, Pat Metheny, John Schofield. He began to get like producing jobs for a lot of these people.
Wow.
Randy Brecker, Mike Brecker, and he worked with John McLaughlin for years. He just got all those amazing sort of gigs. And Mike Stern, he worked with Mike. He produced about a dozen Mike Stern records.
I love Mike.
So Jim was really kind of hooked up in this in that kind of world. It was like all that sort of post Miles and Weather Report got. It was not the smooth jazz thing. That was only beginning to rear its ugly head at the time, and mostly these were like guys who, serious players, kind of trying to keep that sort of tradition that had culminated in Weather Report and a couple of those Miles bands and Kirby's band and Wayne's bands. You know the stuff I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
And so Jim, because he was producing, I ended up getting a lot of calls to do sessions, on some of these records, like a Mike Brecker record we did, a couple Bob Bird records we did, and I was able to contribute a couple songs on these things, a couple Bill Evans records, and so that was sort of, at that time there's quite a lot of there's a whole bunch of records that I got to play on, and this was sort of late '80s and early '90s, so that was sort of the first good work I was getting, and it was kind of intermittent, and it wasn't really paying the bills, but it was great work, and that was good. And then I suppose I'm sure that's what led, because I was sort of on that scene and on those records, it led to that first record that I got to do of my own, which was for a Japanese label. It's no longer in business, but they gave me a real budget, and I made a record called The Complete Rhyming Dictionary, and that was done in '92. So, and I got to use Jim on it, of course, who co-produced it with me, and Victor Bailey, who had been Weather Report's bassist, Peter Erskine, who had also played with Weather Report, and a couple other players. And so this was an instrumental record, and I worked really hard on the writing, and we had a budget, so we were able to record it really well. And of course, it didn't do anything. It was only released in Japan and didn't sell much there, and the company went under not long after that, I think. And, but it was real work, and it was an artistic venture. In some ways, it turned out to be the sort of closing of a chapter, though, of a musical chapter for me, because that work, like in that whole scene I was working with Jim, was sort of on the decline. I really wasn't. It didn't look like we were going to put a band together and tour with it and try to do that instrumental music. It was smooth jazz was kind of taking over, really, and that whole sort of style was sort of becoming harder and harder to sell and to book. And so I had also, because I had met a couple musicians, shortly after I got to New York, maybe a couple of years after I got there. I had put a little trio together, thinking, maybe we could book some gigs and have some fun, and some bar gigs. And I had met the bass player on a wedding gig, with a wedding band, and and I liked him, and we got along, and so he recommended a drummer that he knew, and we got together to play, and basically we started what has turned out to be like a 30-year sort of collaboration, maybe almost 30, maybe not quite. Well, maybe almost 30. But those guys are Dennis Spammon and Frank Pagano, and they're still the guys that I use. It's my basic trio that I still work with when I'm working with my band, and I'm making records. That's the core band we use. So,
I've seen the trio. I'll touch base on that a little bit more in a second, but I just want to back up a little bit. And while you were recording with these guys, do you remember what your recording gear was at that point? What were you using, and were you? I don't know if was anybody still at that time really using tape. I mean, it was kind of starting to go away.
See, well, when we record, when I was doing those sessions with Jim, people still were using tape quite a bit. And when Jim was producing, he would try to use tape all the time. We would often use tape, and then I remember sometimes take it home on ADATs or something, like we record the basics in the studio and then do some overdubs on the ADATs, transfer them to that. But we also, I also remember I was playing Sadowski guitars, which I had bought a couple years after I got to New York. I bought a couple of those. Oh. And I remember playing through an old Mesa Boogie Mark II or something. It was a great amp. And I sent back them to have a good effects loop put in it, and I had two, and then I had another boogie. I was playing in stereo boogies for a while.
Nice.
Some kind of a Lessus reverb and a rack mount, and I had sort of a small little rack rig, at that time, which worked pretty well.
Well, it's New York. You got to have a small everything.
Yeah,
That's
true. It still was a lot to carry.
Yeah.
But yeah, when we were, let's see, we didn't do much. I'm trying to think. I think what we did record with my band, it's hard to remember back, but we were using tape. I mean, there was a studio called Pilot that a friend of mine, Will Schillinger, ran, and he always had tape, so we would always use tape when we recorded with him. And there were still real studios,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess I'm trying to think what I used as amps. That's a good question. Probably that boogie. Yeah, that boogie was on the first record, the instrumental record. The Weather Report-ish kind of record was a boogie with a 4x12 Marshall bottom that they had there. That was a great combination because the boogie was a great amp, but the cabinet was too small,
Mm-hmm.
And boy, that thing through a 4x12 was amazing.
Yeah, I could actually breathe at that point, The little, I always thought the little 112s were just there was no depth and they were kind of nasally and boxy, but you plug it into a good cabinet and
is the EQ on board, and I remember I was always cranking the bass part of the EQ all the way up, just try to get a little low end, but that cabinet was just too small for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's probably a Mark IIc, right?
Well, they made the 2, they made the 2B, the 2C.
Yeah.
2B was my favorite.
I remember a guy came over one time to test something at my house, and he brought one over, and I lived in an apartment on a 3rd floor.
Mm-hmm.
And he sets this thing down, and at some point or something, he said, he goes, man, this thing's really heavy. You ought to try picking it up. And it, of course, had an EV in it.
Yeah, that's what I had for a while, too.
Right? And it was like, what was it? It was 100 watts, right? Or something?
Yeah, they did 60s and 100s.
Yeah, and I was like, this thing's like 90 pounds. And it's, just a little bit bigger than the speaker.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's an arm stretcher. Yeah.
It hurt. I didn't like that. I finally put a Celestion in. It was a lot lighter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for that amp probably sounded a little better, too.
I think so. For my taste, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm no longer a fan of the EVs. I don't know. I mean, some people can work with them, but I can't. I like a little more give,
Mm-hmm. So let me see. You go from recording all that stuff, and
that was
then you had your
interesting.
band.
It was really like the end of a certain era. Like I said, doing that record felt like the closing of a chapter, not the opening of a new opportunity. And I was really glad I did it. I'm still proud of the music on it. It still sounds good to me, but it really turned out not to be music that I was going to explore much more. I began focusing much more on the songwriting thing because, in a way, that was a return to my roots, my high school roots, because that's what the trio has always reflected my taste that way much more. It had much less to do with the jazz, although, my playing it will always sort of have that element because I spent so much time with that music. But But sonically, it was not a jazz thing at all. It was much more blues rock sounds, and songwriting wise, it was really my first language. That whole British invasion rock thing was really my first musical language. The jazz thing was sort of an adopted tongue, and I spent many years trying to sort of smooth out the sort of differences between them, and.
Well, I think you've melded them together rather well.
Yeah.
I finally got there. It took.
Yeah.
I was always hoping I could, although it was my nature to be a purist in each style originally. I mean, when I think of who I like, in any style, I don't tend to like the guys who are, hybrids. I tend to like, the pure. I mean, I love Wes Montgomery. If it's jazz, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Mm-hmm.
It can get different, but it doesn't get any better, And then, in the rock world, I mean, I've just always been in love with that, like that Wheels of Fire tone that Clapton gets in the live tracks. You know,
Yeah.
it's amazing. And that's like, well, if I'm going to play rock, I kind of want it to sound like that. Or if I'm going to play, whatever it is. I like clarity of style. So if I'm, and part of that comes from just being a fan of a lot of different music, but also part of it comes from having been done a lot of work in studios where the job is to sort of play the style right, and effectively. And like, it's not about a hybrid thing. But the more I got to work, really what made me turn the corner that way, I think, was the Steely Dan gig, because they're nothing if not a hybrid kind of concept band, and you can't really play that music effectively if you're not very familiar with jazz harmony. It just, you'll be at sea, you just be like, you won't know what to do. And
right.
So that really gave me a vehicle, and like, it's been 15 years on that gig now. So that's been this repeated opportunity to sort of find a way to, like I said, smooth out all those differences between the rock and the jazz, and find some way to sort of sound like me, in an honest way that doesn't sound like I'm trying to do this or I'm trying to do that, but this is just natural final for me. So I was working on that even before the Steely Dan gig, like in the 90s. Even on that first instrumental record, I was already conscious of wanting to do that, and then with my own band, I was trying to do that too. But the opportunity of the gig to just play guitar and to have to play those tunes, that really was what kind of allowed me to sort of work on that. And I think Time on My Hands, the whole idea behind that record was to try to put the guitar in the center in a way I hadn't ever done on records before, to stretch out a little more, but also to sort of present the kind of solo voice that I had, kind of been able to refine a bit over the years playing with Steely Dan, but for some reason I had never gotten on a record of my own.
Well, I think the whole Steely, I don't know that there could be a better fit for you, really, than the Steely Dan, because they seem to be the same type of band musically that you are in your background in music. They're very jazz oriented, but they can rock it with anybody else, and it just seems to be like you're the perfect player for that band.
Well, I do feel like it was a really a super fortunate break, of course, to get to meet those guys and to get that gig. But I do, and for the first time, I felt like the timing was really good, and my skill set was a good match for them as well. That wasn't always the case. I remember, like with the Jack McDuff gig, the first road gig I had, I would have been able to play that gig so well about 10 years after that point that I had the gig. But 10 years after that point, there's no way I'd ever consider doing that gig for the conditions or for the money. So it was one of those mismatches in time and, sort of skill set matches. It wasn't right at all,
Yet it was perfect.
But, and I remember other times when, it just, something was not quite right, or either I wasn't confident enough for the opportunity, so I didn't sound strong and confident, I was too young, and maybe like another 10 years I would have been okay that way. But the Steely Dan thing came at the right time for me, and I had been playing long enough, and I was confident, and I was thrilled, but I wasn't intimidated. I think that's what I mean, and that was just lucky timing.
I think that's really important, and wow, really important, but you have to feel so accomplished at that point to get a call from Steely Dan to not be intimidated to go play with them. But you see, your career is like a lot of the what we say on this show, because it comes out of a lot of people in one way or another. It's just say yes. Mm-hmm. Don't turn down the opportunities. Just say yes. Throw yourself into it. And, fail or succeed, you're going to get better.
Yeah, there's no question. Every gig will teach you something, and sometimes it'll teach you it negatively, not positively. But
But that's also learning.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
fantastic. No, and also, I mean, even just to sort of redirect you. Sometimes I remember saying yes to gigs when I was struggling in New York in the early years, and I remember sort of not liking some of them and feeling like, oh God, this is awful, And I felt like I couldn't sound good on them, and I remember sort of feeling like for some reason I had to just sort of stick it out, and yet what I ultimately learned, and thankfully I learned it quickly, was I somehow screwed up the courage to tell the guy, listen, you know what? I'm not comfortable playing on this. I don't think I'm going to sound good on this. I think you should give this to somebody else. I'm going to I'm going to pass on playing on this tune or whatever. Like I finally got the nerve to say that, and sort of basically learn how to say no. And then ultimately, when I'd realized that, I felt like, I better take this gig because I should say yes to everything, I would actually learn how to say no to some things, which was really a great thing to learn too, because you part of this whole journey for me is figuring out what is natural for me, like what do I do best, what's the best way to present myself, because invariably for me it's the stuff that I enjoy doing the best, and when it's easy to present. When it's easy to do good work, it's because it feels natural to me. Like it's not too big a stretch. I mean, sometimes stretching is good if it's a little bit, but also I remember doing gigs that were just really not right for me. It's like, and that's just, I'm okay. I was okay. Like finally, it took me a long time, but finally I was okay saying, okay, well, that's not my thing. And like, I'm going to be smart. Next time I'm going to say no thanks, and I'll recommend somebody else who I know is great at that or something.
Well, maybe you took those gigs to
the path, and
right.
You focus, and then you get directed to the right scene that's better for you as a result. So that's good too. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that every experience. I mean, the worst thing is to stay in your room. The best thing is to get out of it and get in the world and start interacting, because that's when you learn what you're about.
Absolutely, and you learn what you're good at. You learn what you don't like, and maybe you learn something you didn't know. Like, I didn't know if I could do this, but this is really cool.
Right, absolutely.
So that's like you said, the worst thing you can do, whether you say yes or no to every gig, the worst thing you can do is just stay in your room or stay in the basement.
Yeah,
that's why there's 7,000 YouTube guys now.
Yeah,
because that's all they do. They just stay in their room. I mean, they play the stuff perfectly.
Some of it's amazing. Yeah,
but
it really is.
But
it's kind of weird. I mean, yeah.
If you put them in a live situation, they probably couldn't cut the mustard because they rarely ever play with anybody.
Yeah, I mean, that's the experience is just going to teach you so much. I mean, and I think that's another reason I've survived on this gig too, the Steely Dan gig, because I mean, if you're going to be on the road with people and you're going to do this again and again, you want people who are, professionals, but also, you need a certain kind of personality to sort of, you need somebody that you can stand to have around every day, and I believe me, I've been on road gigs where there's somebody that, clearly just shouldn't be there because everybody's bugged and like, it's not easy, but you don't learn that in your room either. You learn your people skills by being with people.
Absolutely, you got to be the guy. You got to be easy to get along with, man. You got to be good at what you do, easy to get along with, and if you're both of those things, it can usually be a pretty happy gig for everybody.
Yeah.
So what's your and I saw you the last time you came. I think it was the last time you came through Baltimore. You played the 8x10. Actually, my friend's band Technicolor opened for you guys.
Oh yeah, I remember them. Yeah.
And I didn't take a look at your gear. What's your gear when you're going out with your band, and is it different than what you use on stage with Steely Dan?
It is. The Steely Dan gig, basically, the amp I've been using, the main amp I've been using since the first time I worked with them in 2000. Is a Guytron FV100 now. It was originally not the FV, which is just a sort of like an update of the amp. But it's an amp made by a guy named Guy Hedrick, who doesn't own the company any longer, but who designed it in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And I bought it without hearing it, but there was a rave review for it in Guitar Player magazine, and it's still really one of the most amazing amps I think I've ever played. And I have used it a lot on my own gig. I probably was using it at the 8x10 when we did that. But it's kind of a big head. It's coolest thing about it is that it's got 2 power amp stages. It's got 2 EL84 tubes. It's channel switching, and it's got 4. The master section has 4 EL34 tubes. Kind of runs like a clean vintage Marshall. It has a great effects loop. It has a great master volume. It sounds great at any volume. Seriously believable overdrive at every volume, because he's doing something with the. You got 2 transformers in there. I guess he's doing something with the EL84's output, so that it basically like 2 little small amps that go into one big amp.
Right.
And it's just the greatest thing about it is that it's kind of linear. If you need more sound, you just turn that master volume up, and you don't have to unless you really get it screamingly loud, you don't really have to change any of the other settings, because the power amp is running so clean. So you're really depending on the EL84s for your overdrive.
Right.
And, so it's great for a bedroom, and you don't have to change your controls. Just the one master volume is all it's got to change. And you can, be playing an arena. It's fun. It's amazing. So that's been really my amp of choice. Because it's got the pro features, but it's got sort of vintage tones, and it'll do the Vox and Marshall thing pretty well. Beautiful amp. The other amp I added to the Steely Dan equipment list a few years ago is a Bluto Tone. It's one of those Dumble clones of the Overdrive Special, and also a beautiful amp. It's in some ways it's something more appealing sometimes about some of the sounds in there, but I still don't find it as versatile or as user-friendly as the Guytron. So I mostly use the Guytron when I'm on the road with Steely Dan. But I've had it out and loved changing to it after I've been on the one for a while. I'll switch. So I do occasionally use one or the other. But it's because it's more the Dumble design. It doesn't have as much independent control over the 2 channels. It's a little harder for me to get one of those. The kind of sound I get on the A channel, the Guytron. It's kind of in the crunch area. It's not really distorted, but it's it has a little edge to it. It's harder for me to dial in as many sounds at the same time from the Bluto. But it's a beautiful one. It's gorgeous, and it's much more of a Fender-y thing, but with a beautiful overdrive.
That's where the Dumbles came from, the Fender camp.
This overdrive is pretty great, and it's an amazing amp. So
cool.
Interestingly, I was so impressed with that I asked Brandon Montgomery, the Bluto Tone guy, to try an experiment, because I wanted a smaller amp for my own band to play with, and something that would be lighter and easier to carry around, and because that's when I carry it myself. And we're playing smaller places, so we didn't need a whole lot of sound. So I said, well, can you build me a circuit that's like my favorite amp as a kid, which was that 50-watt Marshall I told you guys about. But I said, I can't use a 50-watt Marshall. I want an amp that has a really great master volume, and I want an effects loop. And I said, can you do that? Because I'd never seen one of those. And he said, I'll give it a whirl. So he did, and I told him the kind of sound I was looking for, and he made a beautiful amp. It's incredible. It's light. It's not a channel switcher. It's dark. It even has a cut control, so I can make it darker if it's too. I like a really dark sound. Kind of like I said, that Wheels of Fire tone. I love a Gibson through a Marshall like that. But at a controllable volume, and also so I can put a little reverb and delay in the loop, and just leave it on, and that's kind of what I do. And this thing is amazing. It's beautiful.
Yeah,
and
I know Brandon. We've met at because we both do the amp shows, and I've met him. He's a really sweetheart of a guy.
And he's an impeccable builder. He's like meticulous. His stuff is beautiful. And the cool thing about it is that I can use a clean boost, which I actually just use as a cut usually to sort of make it a channel switching amp in a way, sort of a fake channel switching amp. Just when I'm singing, I don't always have time to get the volume control on the guitar rolled down to the sweet spot for a rhythm guitar part, which is what I like doing. That it's the way I grew up playing, and it's still the most comfortable. But sometimes I'll use like a clean boost pedal or something, but set to cut rather than to boost, so that it comes back down to. It's sort of like if I can't get to my volume control on the guitar, this will bring it down to rhythm guitar volume right away.
That's pretty cool.
Right.
And I can be thinking about the lyrics and trying to sing, and instead of having to find like 2.5 on the guitar.
Right. 3 1/4. That's what it's got to be.
Now, on this, I don't know what you would call that bio page that was sent over with the CDs. Mm-hmm. It looks like you're playing an SG, right?
I do have an SG that I use a lot on my own band now, and I've been using it with Steely for a couple of years too.
Yeah. The one complaint that I have, because I have an SG, I have a 61 reissue, is Gibson couldn't have put those 4 knobs any closer together. When you're and Gibson is notorious for this, because I don't think, back then it was a different thing because most of the guitars were built because they were jazz players like Les Paul and all. Right. So they weren't really reaching for the volume for like volume swells and stuff back then.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Of course, they kept the tradition, and I'd played some like Strat type guitars, and the volume's like, it's right there. You can do your thing. Yeah. You can do the whole thing with your pinky. Right. On a Gibson, you need a pinky about 10 inches long, and then you can do it. But on that SG, man, it's just so tight.
Well, that's why I moved to volume control. I do this on all my Gibsons. I basically put the switch in a different spot. I put the switch over where one of the other volume controls was, or tone controls was. And if you'll notice, if you see any pictures of the Gibsons, either the 336 or the SG, I've put master volumes in. There's one dummy control that isn't doing anything, and there's 2 tone controls, but one master volume, and it's always the one that's where the switch used to be. If I can move it, I do.
Interesting.
So that you know where the switch is on a 336 or 335. It's like, and on SG too. You could strum it, and if you get a little too crazy with the strumming, you could actually flick the switch and move it to another pickup. Because it's right close. It's sort of where it's almost as close as where the volume control on a Strat would be. Not quite, but
right.
It's kind of in the way. And so I wanted the volume control there. So I just have a guy move the switch to another spot and
look at that
up there. And it's now, and I have them wired as a master volume, so it's always there. And you can't do that machine gun effect, because
you can't turn one pickup off.
Yeah.
But,
interesting.
But you're never caught by surprise when you switch to another pickup and say, and there's no sound, or else, it's too loud. So it's much, much more manageable for me as a player.
That is so cool. I'm looking at it now.
You see, it looks kind of funny because the knobs are not in the normal position, and it's not as pretty, but it sure works.
Much
great.
More functional.
Oh my God, it's so much easier for me, and I like the master volume idea. It's just so much better for me.
That is pretty cool.
That is very cool. Yeah.
But I like having 2 different tone controls, because often on the rhythm on the neck pickup I want the tone all the way up, but I like to roll it back almost all the time on the treble pickup. It's too bright otherwise.
And you do that on your 336s as well, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a picture of it here. This is pretty cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
It's like your switch is far away.
It's like I usually.
Yeah, but that's good. That's okay. I mean, I don't mind that, because again, I used to hit it by accident, which is not cool. So.
Here's a close up, Jeff.
I flipped the. A lot of people do this shit. I flipped the control plate around on tellies.
Yeah,
I've tried that, and then I tried it, and then I had to put it back because I was
really.
I was going. I was going for the. I just couldn't get used to it because I was so used to where the volume was that I had gotten in a habit, and just it kind of messed with my flow, and I got scared and put it right back. I think if I was starting from the beginning, I would stick with it.
Yeah, I guess I never got used to it enough because I don't play them enough, but so I never fell into that habit. But I figured, well, I want the control here, so I'm just going to flip the plate around. A lot of people do it, but
most of these things, I mean, I find it now. I'm in the habit of having that master volume on all the Gibsons, and it's much easier. But I think I don't know. If you play enough, you get used to almost anything. And, you can work on it. But I'm in the habit of doing that. I have to do a series of mods on every guitar before I can
call it your own.
Yeah, it's even on the SG, which was not a cheap guitar. It's one of those custom shop 62 imitations or something. And but I put new frets on it. I put I had to redo the move the pots around and
Now, when you do the refret, do you go with larger frets?
Yeah, I like a taller, like a higher fret, basically.
Yeah.
What's your typical string gauge?
I've been using 10s, although okay. I'm often tempted to try an 11 gauge on the Gibsons, not on the Fenders, but because I do like for some things I really like that fatter tone. But
I was going to say I think that's the jazz guy coming out in you.
Yeah, I think it is. But for over 25 years, I've had like serious left arm issues. So it beats me up if a heavier string would be might be a risk for me because it's I've got serious problems. But so far it hasn't sidelined me except for when I actually had an injury about 25 years ago. But I definitely feel the effects of like a whole night of string bending and just a lot of repetitive part playing. At the end of the night,
you don't need it to lead to carpal tunnel.
And you could always go the Billy Gibbons route.
There you go.
Sevens.
It's like you can't see those things when you take the E strings out.
It's true.
Somehow he does it, man.
I know.
Well, it's interesting. You can get great sounds. I mean, they're just different. It's a different touch, of course.
Sure.
Certain things you can't do.
Right. Well, at least when you're playing with Steely Dan, you get to you don't have to do every solo all night.
No,
you can trade off with Walter.
Songs, but there's a lot of room, and there's especially at the end they got me working, and it's a lot of playing. It adds up, and often I'm icing down, and I'm trying to find a massage therapist during the day, and but that's what all these years have done to me. But but somehow it's like I said, it hasn't sidelined me, so I think I've still got some more notes left in that arm.
Well, you better have some more notes left because you guys got an 8-night run at the Beacon coming up in
that's going to be fun.
October.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. Some of the nights are like one whole album and then something, one whole album and then
that's pretty cool.
I saw that on the site. It's going to be cool. We might have to make it up there for one of those shows, man. I might have to leave the tickets now. Yeah.
Yes,
that would be cool. I've got. There's something I came up with, and I had a question. What are Dukes of September?
The Dukes of September Rhythm Review was a band that did two tours, one in 2010, one in 2012, and a DVD, a live DVD, which we made at Lincoln Center. I guess it was 2012, and it was basically kind of a revival of the same concept as the rock and soul review that Donald had something to do with starting in the early 90s. Basically, it had three front guys: Boz Scaggs, Michael McDonald, and Donald Fagen, and a backup band that was the same for all three guys, and the three guys were all playing as band members, So they'd share the front duties, each sing a couple tunes of their own, and then they'd get to play along, as sidemen for the other guys, on the other tunes. And we did about half the night was sort of cover tunes, everything from like Ray Charles, Chuck Berry, and the Isley Brothers, and all sorts of fun stuff that they always loved, and they never get to do on their own gigs because they're too busy playing their own hits. So it was a blast. We had fun. we did it twice, and there's a DVD which came out really well. And I don't know, it doesn't look like it's going to happen anymore, but you never know, I guess. But it was a fun gig.
Cool. Well, never say never. Maybe we'll get a chance to see that if it comes around anywhere. And you've got a book out, right? You've got some course on True Fire.
It's been a kind of an educational year. I've been meaning to do this kind of thing for years, and of course I've had a lot of private students over the years. But I had a long time sort of dream of releasing a book of jazz guitar solos, arrangements for solo jazz guitar in the chord melody style, of jazz guitar playing. Mm-hmm. And, because I studied that when I really first started studying with that great jazz guitar player, Harry Leahy, I got so into this stuff that I wrote, like tons of these arrangements. And at some point I put my favorite ones together, the ones that I thought were the most interesting and the nicest. And, I said, I'd kind of like to publish this someday, but of course to publish something in print where it's other people's songs, you got to pay licensing fees, of course. So,
yeah.
Some of these songs have like 3 or 4 publishers, and the publishing has changed hands dozens of times over the years. And some of the tunes are, from the 30s, and, so, that just was way too big a job for me to do, And it wasn't until several years into my having hired an assistant, Susan, who to take care of things like that I figured, she can do all that grunt work for me because I'm not going to do that. And, so it's amazing. It took her about 3 months, just to sort of track all these people down and give them money, basically,
Wow.
That's what we're doing. We're just like, saying, hey, we want to use this.
We need to license this, right?
So yeah, can we get a license to do this? And, they all said yes eventually, but it took a long time, a lot of time on the computer and on the phone too, so, but finally she got it all going, and, we paid our licensing fees, and we pressed 500 copies, and so it's sort of a labor of love for me because it's something that I always was proud of the work, and it's not something I do much anymore, but I did do quite a lot of it, and I was proud of the work, and it feels like it could be a valuable contribution for a young jazz guy who's trying to learn that style. I mean, I would have killed for a book like this when I was a kid. I couldn't find too many. I would search all the old music stores and look through all the back racks for these old things. Once in a while, I'd find a little gem like something Johnny Smith had published, But there weren't a lot of things like that. Now there's quite a bit. There's a bit more, method books to do that kind of thing. But this was fun, and I'm glad I finally got it out, and you can get it on my website.
Well, hopefully, some of our listeners that are budding jazz guitarists will look into this, because it sounds like there's a lot of cool stuff that's made, even though there's a lot more stuff out now, it may not, this particular type of, these particular type of arrangements and things may not be available from anybody else or anybody as cool.
I think they're a little, they have some of them have a sort of, original slant. Some of them they kind of double as studies for the picking hand mostly. And some of them are pretty challenging. Some of them are quite, manageable, but, towards the end of the book, some of them get pretty intense, and, they're great picking workout, great exercise for both hands, actually. So.
Well, on the site, we'll have the link, of course, over to John's website, and it'll stay there when it goes out to the archives for
in perpetuity.
That's right.
Great. Thank you. And it's also been a big year because we're about to launch my first instructional course for True Fire. They, you guys know, they're this huge online source for mostly guitar lessons, but not just guitar. And it was really fun to get introduced to them down there in Tampa, and to come up with the idea for this first course, which is called Ear IQ reactive improvisation.
Nice.
And basically, it's a very simple sort of not too difficult in terms of theory. A pretty simple way for players to use their ears to make choices about how to play on chord changes. It's without going through like 10 years of jazz training like I did to learn it. This is the kind of way to just sort of listen to each chord as it comes up in the song and listen to every note against the chord and make choices about which ones are your best sounding notes, and then put them into collections of notes, and then and basically get a strategy for applying a lot of little a lot of little variations to this basic.
This sounds like something that's up my alley, because I'm always searching to, not that I'm anywhere near the caliber player, but I'm always searching to, find a unique way to solo in and around and over things.
Well, I get so many students who are in certain habits, of muscle memory or just they're locked in a box, and they only play, and they play if they're playing a song. They'll just sort of stick with the same basic 5 notes or something, and then but their ears are good enough to notice that sometimes something will happen in the music where the chord is different, and when they're trying to solo on it, if they stay with the same 5 notes, it just doesn't sound right. There's something wrong. Well, so basically, what's going on usually is the chord is borrowing from another key, and some of the notes in the old key don't work in the new key, and you're going to have to sort of, figure out which ones do work and which ones don't. Now, anybody who's got serious theory training and who's studied jazz, this is second nature to a lot of great jazz players, because that's their stock in trade, really. They're what it's all about. But there's a lot of guys that come from a simpler blues or pop or rock background where a lot of tunes you don't really need to do much more than stay in that same key, and those same 5 notes are going to work and going to be pretty cool for the whole thing. But almost always, in a lot of pop music, a lot of rock music, a lot of blues even, a chord change will happen and there's something different. And so 2 things. Number one, if you don't listen carefully and you're locked in that box, you may be playing some notes that really don't work so well with the chord. And the other thing is that you're often missing an opportunity to play something much more interesting and effective, when that chord changes. If you study that chord, if you stop time and listen really carefully to it, and you figure out, oh well, how does this note sound? Or how does this note sound? Then you find you can quickly develop some strategies for the best sounding notes, and you can learn to sort of go for them.
This course is definitely up my alley.
Yeah, well, let me just read off a couple of the featured educators. You got Larry Carlton, Rusty Cooley, Tommy Emmanuel, my favorite guy, by the way, Robin Ford, David Grissom, Johnny Hyland, Sonny Landreth.
This is all the True Fire stuff?
Yeah, this is all True Fire. Carl Verheyen, Dweezil Zappa, Neil Zaza, Mike Zito. We've had a couple of these guys on the show. Andy Aladort.
Yeah.
And it just...
and now Jon Herington.
Yeah, and this list goes forever.
Yeah, there's some pretty incredible stuff there.
Stu Hamm, Jennifer Batten.
But I got to get this one. I got to get John's. This is cool.
Yeah, this is really wild. So you're not. They're not short on on exceptional guitar players.
Oh, and I know we're going really long here, but I have so many more questions. But I wanted to ask you, recording wise with Steely Dan, what is that process like?
Well, they always like to record with a full rhythm section. In fact, I think both times I've recorded records with them, I think there have been 6 rhythm section players at the same time recording. So you need a studio with some ISO booths, and you need everybody's there at the same time, which is kind of rare nowadays.
Yeah.
A lot of records don't get made that way, but they really like to take a long time to let the rhythm section sort of parts develop together, like, so where everybody's sort of adjusting to everybody else, where everybody's listening and they're doing many takes and trying different things, but letting it kind of organically develop over time. And then they have no problem taking time. They'd be happy if they get one good track a day, even sometimes, and so they have the budget for it, and as long as everybody has the patience for it, which all the guys they call, do. So it's a pretty luxurious way to do it, but it really pays off, because by the time we get a keeper take, there's something special going on usually in the interaction of the rhythm section.
That's the way the good Lord intended it to be.
Absolutely.
Because I say this all the time. You can have the best musicians in the world. When you're tracking, there's something that falls out a little bit. When you hear those albums where they're all in the room and they just roll, you kind of feel that a little bit different. I mean, it's not saying that if it's tracked, it's horrible, but there's definitely
if it's independently tracked.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like you bring in a drummer with a click and just and then the bass player emails the stuff in.
Those records, I mean, they sound amazing because everything's leaking into everything else. And
that's beautiful.
It sounds like a real event in real time, and you feel like you're there, and it invites you in. It's great.
Do you have a decent amount of freedom when it comes to your parts?
Yes. Once in a while, Donald will have an idea, and he'll sort of sing something to me and ask me to play something. But most of the time, he'll have a general idea. But absolutely, there's he's totally fine with people trying to fine tune it, come up with their own thing, and I mean, we're pretty open that way, I think.
Nice. Cool. Well, I mean, you definitely have your own style, and you come up with your own thing. And even when you're not trying to, but even when you have parts in the songs where you got to cover like a Skunk Baxter or a Denny Diaz kind of lick, you put your own spin on it. And there may be some semblance of recognition of a part where there needs to be, but other than that, it's Mr. Jon Herington doing his thing.
Well,
and it's so good.
I've always tried to balance, the sort of responsibility of the job of, doing that music justice. I'm a real fan of those records. Those guys made great choices, and
me too.
The arranging is so good, the writing is so good. They called such great players, and I want to make sure that I'm honoring what I love about those records. But on the other hand, I also want to make sure that this doesn't feel like an exercise in, like a history lesson or something like that. I want this to feel alive for me every time I play the song. And so, I'm trying to find that balance of, not being a slave to the stuff that was recorded, but to honor what I love about it. Even if it's just in terms of the sound or the spirit of the part. Sometimes it's more important to actually quote something and really get close to the sound of it for me. But the most beautiful thing is that I've never been instructed to do anything. It's always been completely up to me, which is amazing. I think.
Wow.
Yeah, they just let me make the choice, and that's just, to me, it's amazing. I mean, if I had, I'm glad I went with my gut feeling about what would be good on this, because if I had tried to second guess, like what I thought they would want, I might have gotten it wrong, and I wouldn't have had my heart in it the same way. So, but I've always been able to, just make those choices, and I'm still here.
Well, I as well as thousands and thousands of other people, thank you for making the choices and getting it right, man. Because I really enjoy seeing that band when they're out and playing. They're so good. I mean, I think the last time I missed them a couple times. Last time I had seen them, I think Dennis Chambers was still on drums.
Hey, I got to interrupt you guys. I'm happy to do more. But I can't do any more now.
No, we were actually going to wrap anyway, because it's been going very long, but really great. And John, I want to thank you for taking so much time with us, man.
Yeah, man.
No, it's my pleasure, and I could go on and on, and I'm happy to do it if you want to do more. But like I said, we got to wind down now because I got people waiting for me downstairs.
No, it's all good, and we really appreciate the time. And hopefully, we'll get to see you either your band or when Steely Dan comes back around to the Baltimore area. We'll keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Please get in touch with Susan, and maybe we can hang after a show if you get to one. So
sure.
She can hook that up for you.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yep.
John, thank you so very much. Much continued success and fun.
I'll look forward to checking it out once you guys get it up there. So.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you, John.
You guys take care.
And there you have it.
Yes.
We got quite a story from Mr. Harrington.
Yeah. The audio was a little weird and it's strange in some spots, but you can hear what he's saying. We are sometimes at the mercy of whatever Skype delivers to us that day.
Right. As I said, many times, technology is a wonderful thing.
It is awesome. So, if you hear some little strangeness there, that was all just nothing we can do.
I really do love his style. I always have since the first time I heard him playing with Steely Dan.
To join that band, you got to be above a mark.
Oh yeah.
For it doesn't. They
don't let any slouch in there.
They do not. And the thing is that those guys are at just a different walk of life. That when it comes to music, they just write on another level. But it isn't like, how do I explain it? There's some stuff that's very progressive, very technical.
Yeah.
And this, even though it's difficult music to play, they do it in such a way that it just flows.
Yeah, musically it's very technical. A lot of it is really technical.
Yeah.
Yet it just rolls.
It doesn't feel sterile.
Right.
And it probably a lot to do with how they record.
It could be.
I really think
it has a lot to do with the degree of their musical knowledge.
Well, that probably helps 90%. Yeah, absolutely. You're getting the best of the best.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. That's cool. Well, wow. I remember the word Jizak. That was hilarious. Oh my God.
Yes. Well, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, you got to record something, right? Elevator music for the Lord.
Yes. So until next time, my friend.
Yeah.
I'm Mick Marcelino.
Damn right.
And you are?
I'm still Jeff Bober.
And we're always saying
onward.
Be sure and follow the show on Twitter @AmpsandAxes. Also, make sure you like the show on Facebook. For news, comments, and everything else, visit the webpage ampsandaxescast.com. Thanks for listening.